Hi, everybody. It's Eric here from Steady Notion. I'm joined today by Mr. Spencer Selhi. Spencer and I go way back. We were in college together. It's been a while. We've reconnected just recently. Spencer flies for Maple Leaf Foods, and so hopefully we're going to hear some things from him today about some of his journey as he left the forces, getting into the private sector and into flying, and maybe a little bit about the company that he started as well. So, Spencer, with that, over to you, please.
Oh, Eric, great to see you. It's been a long time.
I know.
Yeah, really excited to be here with you. I guess I'll go right back to the beginning when I was a kid. I wanted to, I wanted to be a pilot, but I also was interested in engineering. So I joined the forces, went to RMC where I met you.
Hmm.
I took mechanical engineering there, and then started my journey towards into aviation. So after RMC, went through flight training, ended up flying Hercs out of Trenton. Did tactical flying, did some deployments to Afghanistan, and then worked my way through some staff tours, and then had the privilege of leading a squadron for 2 years. And then at the end of that 2 years, kind of looked around and where I was family wise and career wise, and thought, you know what, this is probably a good time for a change.
Hmm.
So during kind of the last I think 5 years in the military, I came up with this idea. I was watching an episode of Dragon's Den, and these guys came on with a duffel bag that turned into a closet, and all the dragons were really excited about it. So I thought, oh, geez, I can come up with something better than that. And I think I did. It was basically a carry-on closet
Wow.
is what I came up with. And so I went, kind of worked through some engineering aspects of it. And then I think it was about 2017, tried running a Kickstarter campaign, which was, that whole experience was kind of my intro to, social media, search engine optimization,
Mm.
the whole, facet of digital marketing. And, needless to say, the campaign wasn't successful, but a lot of learning came out of that. So I persevered for a little bit longer and continued to refine the product and tried to, engage with markets on it, and just wasn't able to really turn it. And I think the big shortcoming there was I wasn't able to finance it adequately,
Mm.
and I didn't really have the know-how to tap into equity.
Mm.
So there's just a lot of shortcomings on my knowledge base. As I came out of the forces, I put a lot of time and effort into it, but just didn't have the deep enough pockets to really allow it to go forward. So I gave myself about a year
Mm.
after getting out of the forces to, make it successful. And I just wasn't at a place where I was comfortable saying, okay,
Mm.
it's going to roll on its own. So, I, transitioned. I looked at my options, and I thought, okay, well, in terms of using my skills, my knowledge, my experience, the biggest return, the biggest asset that I have is as a pilot.
Mm.
So I started, pursuing, going into corporate aviation, and had the opportunity to move over to Sky Service was with them for about 3 years, flying a G200, which is about a 10-seat corporate jet.
Mm.
That for about 3 years, and then an opportunity came up flying with the McCain family on Maple Leaf Foods. So I've been doing that for coming up on 3 years now. So
Wow.
it's I get to work with two other ex-RMC grads and Air Force pilots.
Mm.
So it's a really great environment to be in. Very collaborative. It's really not like work. It's, a lot of time, winters are spent, a lot of time in the, um, you know, we're both shuttling executives periodically, and then also, doing charters. We're down in the Caribbean, so lots of good stuff.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
yeah. So, and we get to see, been down to South America, over to Europe, really all over with it. So,
Hmm.
uh, really been able to leverage all that, you know, flying experience that I gained in the military.
Yeah,
And, um, you know, where in the military, there's a lot of, short notice on call, and, you don't always know where you're going, or,
hmm.
you just got to achieve the mission.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas now, it's a lot more relaxed and comfortable, I'll say.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. With this move to Maple Leaf Foods, was this something that did you kind of stumble across it, or was it like it was sort of presented to you as like, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, this might be a good opportunity? Like, how did that all sort of come about, like for you, or was it maybe some other thing that you can speak to?
Yeah, I had a good friend that was with their flight department,
Okay.
and the timing was just right, because I had reached a point of a little bit of frustration with my other flying job. So
Hmm.
just the opportunity presented itself, and the real advantage is that, for the level amount of flying that there is, and there's 3 pilots, so it gives you some amount of control over your life,
Right.
because often, there's flight departments that have, just one airplane and 2 pilots, which means that if the airplane's moving,
Mm.
they need those both pilots. And
Wow.
from a lifestyle perspective, it's not necessarily something that is sustainable, especially when you've got a young family, and
Hmm.
uh, other things on your plate.
Yeah.
So, you know the the Maple Leaf McCain family, there's 3 of us, so it's much more, it's better resourced, and kind of a healthier culture overall.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's maybe something that I don't know how much folks appreciate. Like, you talk to even just maybe folks outside of like the flying community. So I'm trying to think where I'm going with this. So there's this whole concept, like, the CRM, like crew resource management, and, the hours where you're sitting in the seat. So duty time on, duty time off, tempo, getting enough rest between missions or between flights. And for folks that just sort of get on a plane that don't live in that world, they just sort of take it for granted that, the aircraft captain and then the first officer, whoever else is on board, like they're fully rested. They are, 100% operational. They're good to go. And I just wonder, like in your travels, if you've encountered maybe a bit of a bias, as far as, well, you should just be, fit as a fiddle and bright-eyed, bushy-tailed and everything else. Like, I'm feeling fine. Why aren't you? Is that something you encounter, at least in this part of the industry, or is there a bit more acceptance of, what, I just came off of a umpteen-hour run. I need a break. Like, I need some time just to recover and get back to where I can be good again,
Yeah, it's all very heavily regulated.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think lessons came out of, really, since the dawn of aviation.
Mm-hmm.
You start seeing that fatigue is a high risk factor.
Hmm.
And so over time, when they're doing, every accident gets investigated,
Right.
and so over time they start seeing, okay, fatigue was a factor here, and
Yeah.
over and over and over. And so, they started to look at, okay, well, how long was the person working? How much time did they have off?
Mm-hmm.
So then they started putting in restrictions on that side. And more recently, they're starting to get into the specifics of circadian rhythm
Hmm.
and put in restrictions to do with that. So if you are working over periods of your circadian low, at night,
Yeah.
well, you can't work as long. So, they're really tapping into the physiology of everything to try to maximize, human performance.
Hmm.
And that's, you know, there's so many facets of aviation that have kind of, um, you know, I guess the hard part is whenever there is an aircraft accident, it's very visible
Hmm.
and consequences are quite severe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it gets looked at quite deeply. And one I remember one book that I looked at was that my sister gave me was Checklist Manifesto. Looked at how aircraft were um, very mechanical, no consistency. Everything was just kind of okay, figure out how to do stuff.
Mm.
And eventually, checklists came in and flows and figuring out how to the things that need to be done to make the aircraft work properly,
Hmm.
and then um, you know made things much more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, and now and you've got a lot of industries that are learning from checklists, and medicine being one of them.
Mm.
And if you so the checklist manifesto was about essentially the application of checklists into medicine.
Hmm.
um, and medicine has lots of challenges with fatigue,
Hmm.
errors.
Oh yeah.
But when it comes to medicine, the consequences may not be as apparent.
Mm.
And so, um, overall, you've got uh, a lot of learning that has been done in aviation to kind of maximize efficiency and human performance, and being able to transfer that to across a number of industries.
Yes.
And the depth of it in aviation is starting to percolate
Mm.
across. um, and yeah, there's certainly individuals who might have you know kind of their preference in terms of how they perform. And you know we were talking earlier about long haul flights, and yeah, it's better to do kind of two trips in a month that are very long,
Mm.
from a schedule perspective.
Yeah.
But then the consequence of that is also that you're working for longer durations, and over a short period of time, your overall sleep
Mm.
is degraded, so you need a longer time to recover.
Yeah.
um, and then there's long-term consequences of all of that. So you've got to put that all into perspective.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, there's going to be some pain felt either way, so it just depends on where you're going to, I guess, feel it and how you're going to absorb it and all that stuff. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's I think it's good just to get the word out as far as, the level of effort and just how much it takes to actually fly a plane. Again, from that, concentration, just application of all these different skills that come to bear, and how taxing that can be on the body. So the importance of proper rest and proper nutrition. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into this that I'm sure the industry as a whole is hopefully getting better at as time goes on. There's new lessons being learned, and those lessons are getting adopted, and so there's sort of this continuous improvement aspect to it that hopefully is taking place.
Yeah, and it's across so many disciplines, even just within aviation. There's the technical aspects, there's the human resources, there's the logistical components.
Yeah.
To get each aircraft to move, it takes an orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
really in concert to get things to happen.
Yeah.
And the expertise of people. Um, there's levels of knowledge that you certainly can't really appreciate until you go into someone's world, and you realize, oh wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. It's an entire industry.
Yeah.
Sort
Yeah.
And yeah, it's everywhere. And a lot when I was, in my, trying to get my business going. Yeah, it was realizing then, oh wow, I didn't even know this existed,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an entire industry.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it's very, the levels of knowledge and expertise across, such a vast, array of industries. And then the depth
Yeah.
within those industries. It's incredible.
I might sound a little, preachy here. Sorry for coming across this way. I was shown a video the other day of passenger misbehavior. So this would be like people that are essentially getting their moment in the spotlight. They're creating drama. There's all sorts of
Yeah, they're
silliness.
yeah they're not, maybe they're not getting, their trip is delayed. They're upset. They're going to miss their connection, and
Yeah.
they just need to, some people will grin and bear it, and other people will say, well, I'm the most important person in the world, and you know I want to get what I want.
I guess I'm asking this in a sense, so like from your colleagues, people, because from folks you must still be in connection with that are in other parts of the industry. Are they starting to see an increase in these incidents, and is that causing? I'm sure it must in some way be causing a detrimental effect on the air crew and on, say, the other folks that are involved with the whole aviation apparatus. And in what way can we maybe make this better? Like, is there something that the industry can help to say, okay, we need to maybe educate the public a bit better on aviation safety? Or it's going to sound kind of silly here, or maybe some of these suggestions are just totally out to lunch, but I'm wondering if there's a way that the public can become better informed about this. Is not just you having a tantrum at McDonald's where maybe somebody's going to dip their hand in a fryer, and
Right.
we wouldn't want that to happen. But that being said, it's not as if like 300 people are going to just come crashing to earth. It's different scope of risk. So how does that get communicated so that people just sort of hopefully gain a broader awareness of these actions are going to have consequences? So please just do your best to be respectful, and if you're going to do some drama, maybe do that on a green screen somewhere else where you're not going to be affecting all these other people, and they're just trying to do their jobs at the end of the day. It's so I'm wondering what the answer is here. Have you thought about that, or is anybody that you've been talking with given that some thought? Or
Well, usually in my experience, communication can, de-escalate 99.9% of any, conflict.
okay,
Usually there's a misunderstanding. And if someone's upset, telling them, hey, you know what, you're right to be upset.
sure, validate their feelings, right?
If these are things that, people, I mean, I often see it in my own life, dealing with, my family. Sometimes, hey, here's what's happening,
Yeah.
and someone's frustrated, and if you deal with it in a way of, well, okay, just get over it, let's go.
Yeah.
Well, that's not validating, and you're not allowing, the communication piece to try to, allow for de-escalation. You're basically just ignoring it.
Right. Right.
And so, in the same thing in any setting, like, airport terminal, in a, airplane that's, 35,000 feet in the air. There obviously there's when you're dealing with, people, there's, personalities, there's fatigue, there's all sorts of factors that come into play, and on both sides. So as, when you think about, flight attendants are often the ones that are, face to face with passengers, or the gate attendants. And who knows how long are they into their shift,
Exactly. Yeah.
what's going on in the background with them. And then someone presents with a, their own personal situation that needs to be dealt with. And it's like, okay, I appreciate you've got a problem, but there's hundreds of other people that have a similar issue, maybe not the same.
Yeah.
You're not really any different. But taking the time to just, sit back, communicate,
Mm-hmm.
validate, and often because people are dealing with a company, they've purchased a ticket. Um, so they'll need to, the onus is on the company to train their staff,
Yeah.
and have them be aware. Okay, here's what could be a barrier to your own responses.
Mm-hmm.
So to take time to be aware of where you are,
Yeah.
and here's where the other person could be. They may have zero awareness of what their situation is, but you have to, as the company representative, you've got to be the one who deals with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, when you're at 35,000 feet, well, there might be another flight attendant down the aisle,
Mm-hmm.
but also you might be on your own. Maybe it's a smaller aircraft, and
Yeah.
there's just one flight attendant back there for 40, 50 passengers. So
Mm-hmm.
and now after 9/11, with all the the doors locked for the crew up front,
Right.
you may not have other resources to draw on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I think there's a lot of frustration that's occurred over the last coming out of COVID. People aren't necessarily as patient and respectful as maybe they were 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The whole concept of flying, it's taken for granted when you think about, okay, we're hurtling through space at 500 miles an hour. It is still pretty incredible when you think about you look at some of these aircraft. They get off the ground and they fly to the other side of the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's pretty incredible.
It is.
But
Yeah.
it's something that when you think about a lot of people now, they can just take it for granted.
Mm-hmm.
People that are 20 people that are 25 now, they were born in 2000. Well, they don't know a world before really the internet.
Exactly. Yeah.
So perspectives change.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, who are you dealing with? You might have someone that maybe has, they're tired. They might have their own health issues, and they may not have perspective that other people have. So
Yeah.
it's just tough, and largely it's on the companies to kind of make their staff able to deal with those challenges.
I guess that with dealing with those challenges is a great thing to segue into next. Sorry if I keep tugging on this thread. You can just tell me to, go into something else if it's getting too much here. But with the companies that recognize that this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, which hopefully by this point people are gaining this awareness and they're getting enough folks coming forward, maybe on the staff side, saying, hey, we had this incident, we had that one. Oh, this is happening. There's an increase in some of this, we'll call it, bad behavior instance. So are the companies, as far as like just from talking with your friends and folks that are in the industry, are these companies putting on more resources for the staff, for whether it's things like crisis intervention, could be mental health, could be any number of other sort of tools in the toolbox that are more on like the soft side of things, where we have this program or service that's available to you as the employee, and so you have this option now of, like peer outreach, mental health. Again, I keep saying mental health, but essentially like, whether that's with counseling or it's even just getting through what for some people could probably be a very difficult set of circumstances. So there's a little bit of processing they probably have to do with that. And if it's something that it's affecting them over a period of time, well, that tends to then just eat away at them. So eventually they either get burned out or some other thing happens. So is that sort of where the industry is trying to move towards as well, is recognizing the problem and also trying to put the right measures and things in place to help the staff out with these things?
Well, I can't really speak to specifics, any particular company or, yeah, it's difficult to say only because, the niche that I'm in is a little bit different.
Right.
But I can say that, from what I've observed, there's an awareness, going back to, the depth of knowledge. And so on the human resource side, these companies have a lot of, resources. And so they are aware of, current issues, emerging issues, and they put a lot of time and effort into making sure that, they are training their employees adequately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's limited time in the day.
Yes.
That was, back, in the forces. We had all sorts of training that we had to do,
Yeah.
and as you progress through your career, sometimes you had to take, kind of higher level, more management oriented training, leadership training, and just to make you aware of what resources are out there and what the emerging challenges are.
Right.
And but you didn't have time for all of it. If you were spending all your time focused on those activities, you would have very limited time for your actual job. And so it's kind of like okay, we've got to triage, what do we need to deal with. And so I know that there's a number of consultants that do have expertise in delivering various modes of human resource and training to was directed at the aviation industry.
Yeah.
I'm not certain that all companies deliver equivalent training. I think some companies have limited resources and they're just concentrating on trying to make ends meet. Others, with deeper pockets and more resources, can develop their employees more holistically over time.
Right.
But it's and it's not just limited to aviation. Obviously, there's so many different challenges in as society evolves, and awareness of what individuals need, and the effort is, okay, well, how do we, as a company, how do we make our environment as healthy as possible, so that our employees not only can be productive, but also we hold on to them. Employee retention is, it costs a lot of money to lose an employee, both in monetary and productivity. So it's quite a it's a balancing act to try to find the resources, coordinate the time, make sure that your employees can access them. A lot of them are through employee assistance programs where, okay, you can call this number, but that's not always as personal as what some employees need for kind of at the extreme.
Yeah.
And interventions earlier on may help mitigate those issues in the first place. So
Yeah.
there's a wide spectrum, and there are a lot of resources. It's just that it's that tension between, okay, do we spend our time providing those resources and focusing on that at the expense of what we're here to actually do.
Yeah.
So it's a tough balancing act. Yeah.
Wow.